The air in Springfield hung thick with the stench of decay and the faint hum of radiation. Under a sky perpetually bruised with sickly green clouds, the town gathered in the central square, their faces etched with a mix of dread and reverence. Torches flickered, casting jagged shadows on the cracked pavement as the crowd formed a semicircle around a makeshift altar draped in tattered yellow cloth. At its center stood a trembling figure, a worker from the nuclear plant, his orange jumpsuit stained with sweat and grime. This was the night of the tribute, a grotesque ceremony to appease the divine wrath of Charles Montgomery Burns, the immortal. God of Springfield, Bart Simpson, crouched behind a rusted dumpster, watched with clenched fists, his heart pounding like a war drum. The ceremony began with a low chant, a guttural hymn that rose from the throats of the devout. The worker's eyes darted wildly, his pleas drowned by the crowd's fervor. From a platform above, Waylon Smithers, clad in a robe embroidered with glowing green sigils, raised his arms. A pulsating light erupted from a device at the altar's base, an alien artifact, its surface a maze of impossible angles that seemed to writhe under scrutiny. The light enveloped the worker, and his screams tore through the night as his body began to change. His skin bubbled and melted like wax, dripping to the ground in viscous clumps. Bones cracked and reshaped, sprouting jagged protrusions. His eyes glowed with an unnatural emerald fire, and a third arm erupted from his chest, clawing at the air. The crowd gasped, some falling to their knees, others weeping in awe. The transformed creature staggered forward, now a radiant servant of Burns, its grotesque form a testament to the god's power. Bart turned away, bile rising in his throat, but the image seared itself into his mind. He slipped through the alleys, the chants fading behind him. Springfield was a shadow of itself, a theocratic dystopia where every street bore the scars of eternal devotion. Posters of Burns, his skeletal face haloed in green, plastered every wall. Bart's rebellion had been brewing for months, fueled by whispers that Burns was no god, just a frail old man propped up by lies. Tonight's horror only hardened his resolve. He had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. At home, the Simpson house was a mockery of warmth. The walls pulsed faintly, as if infected by the town's radiation. Homer sat at the kitchen table, his flesh sagging like molten dough, muttering prayers to Burns between bites of a glowing donut. Marge, her hair a brittle tangle, stirred a pot of soup that shimmered with an eerie luminescence, her eyes hollow and unblinking. Lisa and Maggie, huddled in a corner, were silent, their skin mottled with faint green veins. Bart's stomach churned. This wasn't his family anymore. Not really. "I'm gonna end this," he whispered, more to himself than to them. Marge's head snapped up, her gaze sharp. "Don't speak against the divine," she hissed, her voice a stranger's. Bart backed away, the weight of their transformation crushing his chest. Later, in an abandoned warehouse, Bart met with his small band of rebels. Milhouse was there, his glasses cracked, a grotesque extra arm sprouting from his neck, twitching involuntarily. Nelson, his smirk replaced by a haunted grimace, sharpened a makeshift blade. A handful of others, former classmates, neighbors, clutched whatever weapons they could scavenge. "Burns ain't a god," Bart said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "He's just an old creep. We gotta show him." Milhouse, trembling, suggested storming the plant, the heart of Burns's power. The group nodded, their faces grim but determined. They sketched a plan: infiltrate the plant, find proof of Burns's mortality, and broadcast it to the town. It was reckless, but it was all they had. Bart revealed a crumpled document he'd stolen. From an old library, a personnel file from the plant, yellowed and brittle. It described Burns as a mere man, born decades ago, prone to ailments and tantrums. "This is it," Bart said, holding it up. "Proof he's no god." The rebels' eyes lit with hope. But the moment was fleeting. Milhouse's extra arm twitched violently, and he clutched it, wincing. "We don't have much time," he muttered. Bart nodded, the weight of their mission settling like lead in his bones. Their first move was to spread the truth. Under cover of darkness, they slipped through the streets, pasting copies of the document on walls and shoving them under doors. But Springfield's devotion ran deep. A mob formed, their faces twisted with rage, accusing the rebels of blasphemy. "Heretics!" they screamed, hurling stones. Bart dodged a projectile, but Milhouse wasn't so lucky. Hands grabbed him, dragging him toward the plant as he screamed Bart's name. Bart ran, his lungs burning, guilt clawing at him. He hid in a storm drain, the mob's shouts echoing above. Milhouse was gone, and the failure stung like a blade. That night, sleep eluded Bart. He lay in his hideout, a crumbling attic, staring at the ceiling. Then it came, a vision unbidden and merciless. Milhouse stood before him, his body a writhing mass of radioactive flesh, his face half melted, laughing through a mouth that stretched too wide. "Join us, Bart," he gurgled, his voice a chorus of whispers. "The divine sees all." Bart jolted awake, sweat soaking his shirt, the laughter still ringing in his ears. The vision wasn't just a nightmare. It felt real, like a warning. The plant, the artifact, Smithers, something was watching him, something beyond Burns. Bart gripped his skateboard, his knuckles white. Bart's breath hitched as he slipped through the rusted gates of the Springfield nuclear power plant, the night cloaking him in uneasy shadows. The air was thick with a metallic tang, and the faint green glow seeping from the plant's cracked walls pulsed like a heartbeat. He'd stolen a worker's jumpsuit, its fabric stiff with grime, and pulled the hood low over his face. Milhouse's screams still echoed in his mind, a relentless reminder of the stakes. The plan was simple, but perilous. Infiltrate the plant, find evidence of Burns' fraud, and uncover whatever power held Springfield in its grip. Bart gripped the stolen keycard, his palms slick with sweat, and stepped into the labyrinth. The corridors stretched endlessly, their walls slick with an unidentifiable ooze that glistened under flickering fluorescent lights. The hum of machinery vibrated through the floor, but beneath it Bart heard something else, a low, rhythmic whisper like voices speaking in a language he couldn't grasp. He moved cautiously, avoiding patrols of blank-eyed guards whose skin shimmered with faint green veins. Every step deepened his unease. The plant felt alive, its architecture twisting in ways that defied logic, corridors looping back on themselves, or ending in walls that hadn't been there moments before. Bart's heart raced, but he pressed on, driven by the image of Milhouse's twisted form. In a control room lined with monitors, Bart froze. Waylon Smithers stood before a console, his silhouette framed by the glow of screens displaying Springfield's streets, homes, and citizens. His robe, embroidered with alien sigils, shimmered as he murmured to a figure slumped in a throne-like chair, "Burns." The old man looked frail, his skin paper-thin, his eyes clouded with confusion. "Excellent, Smithers," Burns wheezed, his voice barely audible. "Keep them devoted." Smithers' lips curled into a fervent smile, but his eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, cold and predatory. Bart's stomach twisted. Burns wasn't the master here. Smithers was pulling the strings. He ducked behind a panel, his mind racing. If Burns was a puppet, what was Smithers wielding? Following Smithers at a distance, Bart navigated deeper into the plant's bowels. The whispers grew louder, clawing at his thoughts, until he reached a sealed chamber. The door was etched with symbols that seemed to writhe under his gaze. Using the keycard, he slipped inside and stifled a gasp. At the chamber's center stood an artifact, a grotesque structure of twisted metal and pulsating green crystal, its form both mechanical and organic, like a machine grown from flesh. It radiated a heat that made Bart's skin prickle, and the whispers became a deafening chorus, urging him to kneel, to worship. This was the source, the heart of Springfield's nightmare. Bart's hands trembled as he scribbled notes, sketching the artifact's shape. He had to show the others, had to destroy it. But the artifact sensed him. A pulse of green light surged, and Bart's vision shattered. He was no longer in the chamber, but floating in a void, surrounded by a writhing shadow, an entity, vast and hungry, its form a tapestry of eyes and mouths that spoke in unison. "Serve," it demanded, its voice a blade slicing through his mind. Bart saw Springfield burning, its people transformed into radiant horrors, himself at their head, a god-king bathed in green fire. The vision promised power, eternity. But beneath it lurked a ravenous emptiness. Bart clawed his way back to reality, collapsing on the chamber floor, gasping. The artifact's influence was alive, sentient, and it knew he was there. Footsteps echoed. Bart scrambled to hide as Smithers entered, his movements precise, almost mechanical. He approached the artifact, adjusting dials on a control panel. A worker was dragged in, bound and whimpering. Smithers activated the artifact, and the man's screams filled the chamber as green light consumed him. His body twisted, sprouting extra limbs, his face melting into a grotesque mask of devotion. "For the divine," the creature moaned, its voice no longer human. Smithers watched, his expression a mix of reverence and madness. Bart's blood ran cold. The artifact wasn't just transforming bodies, it was rewriting minds, binding them. To Burns's cult, he had to get out, had to warn the others, but the guards were closing in. Alarms blared, and Bart sprinted through the corridors, the plant's layout shifting around him like a living trap. He dodged a guard's grasp, his skateboard clattering as he slid under a closing gate. The whispers pursued him, burrowing into his thoughts, urging him to surrender. Just as he reached an exit, a figure stepped from the shadows, Lisa. The wind howled through Springfield's shattered streets, carrying the faint stench of radiation as Bart and Lisa gathered their ragtag band of rebels in a crumbling warehouse. The group was smaller now, their faces gaunt with fear and resolve. Nelson's hands trembled as he clutched a crowbar, while a handful of others, former neighbors and classmates, gripped scavenged pipes and blades. Lisa, her skin mottled with glowing green veins, unfolded her notes, her voice steady despite the pain etched in her eyes. "The artifact is the key," she said, pointing to a sketch of its pulsing core. "Overload it, and we break the entity's hold." Bart nodded, his jaw tight. The memory of Milhouse's twisted form and the artifact's whispers gnawed at him, but there was no turning back. They would storm the plant, destroy the relic, and free Springfield, or die trying. Under the cover of a moonless night, the rebels crept toward the nuclear plant, its silhouette looming like a malignant god. The gate stood unguarded, an eerie invitation that set Bart's nerves on edge. Inside, the corridors pulsed with green light, the air thick with the artifact's oppressive hum. The group moved swiftly, Lisa guiding them through the labyrinth based on her stolen blueprints. But the plant seemed to resist them. Walls shifted, shadows writhed, and the whispers grew into a cacophony, urging surrender. A rebel faltered, dropping his weapon as his eyes glazed over, murmuring prayers to Burns. Nelson knocked him out, his face grim. "It's messing with our heads," he growled. Bart gripped his skateboard, forcing himself to focus. They couldn't afford to break. The chamber housing the artifact was a cathedral of horror, its walls slick with pulsating ooze. The relic stood at the center, its twisted metal and glowing crystal radiating a heat that made Bart's skin crawl. But before they could act, Waylon Smithers emerged from the shadows, his robe shimmering with alien sigils, his eyes blazing with an unnatural green fire. "You dare defile the divine?" he hissed, his voice layered with the entity's malice. Behind him, a dozen radiant servants, grotesque, mutated workers, lurched forward, their extra limbs clawing the air. The rebels fought desperately, pipes clanging against warped flesh, but the creatures were relentless, their glowing eyes fixed on Bart. Lisa dragged him toward the artifact, shouting, "Keep them off us!" Nelson and the others formed a shaky line, their screams mingling with the creature's guttural moans. Smithers advanced, his presence suffocating. "You cannot stop what is eternal," he said, raising a hand. The artifact flared, and Bart's mind buckled under a vision. Springfield transformed into a radiant hellscape, its people fused into a single writhing mass, himself at its heart, crowned in green fire. The entity's voice boomed, offering godhood, promising an end to pain. "Join me," it whispered, its words a blade against his soul. Bart's knees buckled, but Lisa's voice cut through the haze. "Bart, fight it!" she screamed, her hands on his shoulders. He clung to memories, skateboarding through Springfield, Lisa's saxophone, Marge's laugh, anchoring himself to the world he wanted to save. With a guttural cry, he tore free, gasping. Lisa was already at the artifact's control panel, her fingers flying over alien dials. "Help me overload it," she shouted. Bart joined her, following her frantic instructions as the battle raged behind them. Smithers lunged, his hands glowing with energy, but Nelson tackled him, buying them seconds. The artifact's hum became a shriek, its light searing their eyes. Bart saw flashes of the entity, a shadow vast as the cosmos, its mouths screaming in rage. "Now!" Lisa yelled, slamming a lever. The artifact erupted in a blinding wave of green, the chamber shaking as if reality itself were unraveling. Smithers screamed, his body convulsing as the entity's hold shattered. The radiant servants collapsed, their glow fading, and the whispers fell silent. When the light dimmed, the artifact was a smoldering ruin, its crystal cracked and lifeless. The plant's oppressive hum was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Bart helped Lisa to her feet, her body trembling from the radiation's toll. Outside, Springfield was waking. Citizens stumbled into the streets, their eyes clear for the first time in years, confusion replacing devotion. Burns, found wandering the plant's halls, was no longer a god, just a frail old man, muttering to himself, ignored by those he once ruled. The cult had crumbled, its illusion shattered, but victory was bitter. The rebels who survived bore scars, physical and mental. Nelson cradled a broken arm, his smirk gone. Lisa's glow had faded, but her skin remained mottled, a permanent mark of her sacrifice. Bart found Homer and Marge in the crowd, their faces human again, but their bodies still bore the radiation's cruel touch. Homer's flesh sagged, Marge's eyes held a haunted glint. Maggie clung to Marge, her silence louder than any cry. Bart wanted